covering today because these are people who do experiential entrepreneurship education. So I have with me Doan Winkle. He is a professor of entrepreneurship at Illinois State, and he is one of my favorite teachers because he has this amazing superpower where he's able to identify some of the best resources and tools available and combine them in an interactive way for his students and bring the most out of his students and his course. So he's here today and he's going to tell us a little bit about how he does that. So thank you so much for joining us, Don.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's good to be with you. And what are you doing, Justin? Oh, you got a delay. Sorry, I'm working on it. Yeah, so I teach entrepreneurship over at Illinois State University, and I've been a big fan of experiential and having students learn by doing, because I think that's the only way that you can really teach this stuff. And so as I played around with it and learned how and experimented with how to do this, found out a couple things. One is that the methods that I was using early on were by no means rigorous or able to be assessed. And so my administrators had a problem with that. And I just realized that I was lacking some of that structure. And so I keep the experiential part of it, but what I try to add into it and try to build a class around is something that can be a little rigorous and something that I can also somehow assess. And having something with that kind of structure, I think, is important from an educator standpoint because, like I said, it keeps your bosses happy, and we all know that that's something we have to do. It's a box we got to check. But I think it also creates a much more powerful learning experience for the students. It's easier to kind of set some expectations so they know where you're going. It fits a little bit more into the box that they want to fit into, and gets them on board. And I think if we do this right and we do this in a truly experiential fashion, it's something that really is very scary for lots of students. And so being able to put it in a little bit of a box that they're comfortable with gets a little bit of that fear out of the picture. We don't want to take it all away, but it gets a little bit out. And so, basically what I realized in working through this is, it's really critical to have some sort of a process in place. And there's a ton of tools that are out there for how to teach all these parts and pieces and components of ideation and customer development and lean startup and business planning and feasibility and all this stuff. There's tons and tons of tools out there, but they're all scattered and they're not really linked together very well. And so as educators, we look at those and we say, well, that thing seems kind of cool to me. I think it goes here, but then what comes before it and what comes after it and how do I tie them all together? And most of us are not very good at doing that. And partly because there's sort of information overload, and partly just because a lot of us are not trained to do that. And so, that process piece is important because it starts to link all of those elements together, and it starts to get us thinking about, these are the tools I want to use, but how do they line up together so that the students can progress in some sort of a sequential pattern, right? We don't want too much structure, but we want a little bit there. And so it becomes this end-to-end process. And it can be, any part of the sort of entrepreneurial process. It could be a little piece, it could be the entire piece, whatever it might be, but it has to have that process in place. And some of the tools, Diana's book, your work, Justin, other people's stuff that I use, part of the reason I like it is because it also helps us create a common vocabulary. And so when we're talking about, using these tools and making things very experiential, I find that I want to have a common vocabulary among and across all my students, so that it kind of cuts through the noise. And so using some of these tools and having some of that process in place, in addition to being rigorous and all that stuff, it gives us this common sort of vocabulary. And it helps to do that if we narrow down the number of things that we use, the number of tools that we use. And so, again, instead of trying to pull in 10, 12, 15 different things, if we focus on 2 or 3 different sort of tools and really use those and get the students iterating with those and using them again and again and again and measuring and assessing them with student feedback, peer feedback, my feedback, investor feedback, whatever, then all of a sudden we start to have a much more kind of defined process in place. And from the educator standpoint, it becomes much easier to assess that, which again, I'm not a fan of necessarily, but it's a necessary evil in my mind. So basically, my take on this and why I think this is so important, and the work that you both are doing is so important, and where I think it adds a ton of value is it helps educators be rigorous. It helps us to think about what process do we want to have in place. It certainly helps us with creating a common vocabulary and with having a series of exercises and some sequential kind of tools to plug into a process. And that gives us that really powerful experiential learning component that I think is just critical for this. And then it also gives us an opportunity to be able to measure a student's ability to kind of apply these tools and to execute and to do it iteratively, to just keep going back over and over and over again. And again, that becomes a much better way to assess things. So it's not just a one-off kind of a thing, but it's let me look at the progress that you've made over the course of a couple weeks or a semester, whatever it may be. So, my 2 cents is, if you're an educator and you're wanting to develop or enhance an entrepreneurship course, innovation, creativity, whatever, and make it a lot more experiential, it's really, really, really hard thing to do. It's not easy to do it really well. I by no means have it right, but I'm willing to play around and try things out. And in doing that, what I figured out is you have to have this end-to-end process. That makes it rigorous. It's good for the administrators, good for the students. You have to make it accessible. The students like that, the administrators like it. It makes your job a lot easier. And the way to do it is build that process and sprinkle it with a few tools, kind of like what Justin will talk about a little later. So
that's wonderful. Awesome, Joan. Thank you so much for that overview, and I appreciate the introduction. It's fantastic. Couldn't have said it better myself. All right, so we also have Diana Kander with us today, and so Diana's going to talk a little bit later on about how she's actually used some of these tools that Dawn mentioned in her actual class. But so that you guys know, if you're not already familiar with the illustrious Diana Kander, which you should be, she is the author of the New York Times best-selling All In Startup. So we're not only grateful to have her here because she's super famous, but also because, let me just make sure. Dawn, you're still with me, yeah?
Yeah. You just lost me for just a second.
Okay, looks like Dan is back. Okay, cool. So we've got at least her audio. And so she got embarrassed. I said she was super famous, and then she left us. So we're going to pretend like she's not that famous.
I didn't hear any of the nice things you said.
Okay. So the other reason that she's here in particular is because we are using, or a lot of folks are using her book, All In Startup, in her actual in their classes. And so over 70 different universities and colleges are using her book, so she knows of what she speaks. So Dan, I'll just have you say hi to everyone real quick.
Hi, everybody.
Okay, great job. And then we're going to move on, and we're going to dive into a little bit about what Dawn talked about. And sort of break this up a little bit and talk about how you can actually use an end-to-end process to create this rigorous, experiential, and accessible course. Okay, so with that in mind, I'm going to hang out here, and we're going to do a little bit of slides. And we're just going to make sure we're on the same page here, right? That teaching entrepreneurship is hard. To Dawn's point, one of the reasons why it's so difficult is because entrepreneurship typically lacks an end-to-end process, right? Where like a history teacher, you started a date and then you move forward. A biology teacher talks about, individual cells and then moves up the chain. So in entrepreneurship, we don't have that similar end-to-end process. And so we're going to talk about how you can actually create one and how doing so is going to give you this rigorous, experiential, and accessible course. All right, so let's talk about rigor and how a process leads to rigor. So a lot of us use the business model canvas right now to teach, or used to use it, and it's fantastic. Business model canvas, lean canvas, they're both fantastic tools because they help get all of the assumptions out on the table and help your students understand everything they need to test in order to start a successful company. And then Dawn, I'm just going to ask you to mute your mic. Awesome. And then, okay, so then we're going to talk about Don't. Can you double check? I can just hear your typing. Okay.
Oh,
Okay. All right. And then, so business model canvas. Awesome tool because it teaches all the things that we need to test. The problem is the business model canvas isn't an end-to-end process in and of itself. It's basically what starts a process. But then after that, like, you're left with a bunch of questions, right? And it's very difficult to teach from because it doesn't tell you what order teams should go in, like which assumption should they test first and which one should they test next. And you end up getting a bunch of different people testing on a bunch of different things. It also doesn't tell you what tests they should run. So how do they know, when should they run concierge tests? When should they run letter of intent? When should they do customer interviews? When should they do price testing? And it doesn't tell them how to actually run the experiments. Like, how do you do this stuff? And if you're not familiar with it, if you haven't done it yourself, like this business model canvas isn't going to teach you how to do that. So what we are talking about today is how to create this process, how to create a structured end-to-end process that's going to help you answer some of those questions and create this kind of curriculum that we all want to have in our classrooms. Speaking of classrooms, I just want to give you a little bit of background about me. So I don't teach in traditional academic situations. I teach at startup accelerators and for communities around the world. So I teach basically with organizations like Techstars, Google for Entrepreneurs. I teach like entrepreneurs who are actually applying these things at scale. So it's a really nice combination between what Don and Diana bring to the table and then just sort of this very practical, real world aspect that I'm going to present to you. Speaking of which, I'm going to show you what I actually teach at accelerators and for communities. And it's this 5 assumption model, and it's all based on a single principle. So feel free to use any and all of this that you want. But the one thing you have to know is that all of the assumptions are based on this single principle. And it's a principle you already teach, I imagine. If you're teaching validation-based learning, you're already familiar with this concept. And that principle is that customers don't buy products. Customers buy solutions to problems. So if you know this, and I'm sure you do if you're teaching entrepreneurship, if you know this and you're able to teach your students this one principle and drive this principle home, the rest of these 5 assumptions lay out just beautifully in terms of teaching an end-to-end process. Okay, so we know customers don't buy products, they buy solutions to problems. So with that in mind, we can build on these 5 assumptions, and they go in order. So assumption number 1 that your teams need to test is that they can find a problem people are already trying to solve. So if they can find people who are already trying to solve that problem, they can validate that there's actually a business to be built here. If they go out and they can't find people who are already trying to solve the problem, they have discovered an idea that is literally before its time. This is how you know whether or not the market is ready for your product. If there are people already trying to solve the problem, then yes, the market's ready. If there aren't people trying to solve the problem, there's no market for you. All right, so that's assumption number 1. Once you've proven that you can find people who are actively trying to solve the problem, next you're going to move on to proving that they want your help solving the problem. So your teams are actually going to put together their marketing channels and their marketing copy and then push them out and push out an offer to say, hey, look, I can help you solve this problem that you're already trying to solve. Do you want help solving it? And you prove that people actually want to engage with your offered solution. All right, so this is assumption number 2, that people want your help solving the problem, that they will engage with your marketing. After you've proven that, then teams can move on to proving that people will pay to solve the problem. So now you're testing, can you actually build a successful business in exchange for solving this problem? And pay is in quotes here because most companies require actual payment, revenue, currency, but a lot of companies don't. Ad-based companies, a lot of companies that students are building, or maybe impact organizations, they want a different kind of payment. So what you're testing here is that your customers will give you, as the founder, what you need in order to achieve your victory, in order to build the business you want. So once you've proven that you can find people trying to solve the problem, that those people want your help solving the problem, and they will pay you to solve the problem, then and only then do you move on to test that you can actually solve the problem. So this is where we build something. This is like the MVP stage, right, that you can solve it. Now this is fourth. It comes fourth, not because this is going to be easy, but this will be easier than all the rest of these assumptions. The reason being, humans are naturally great problem solvers. And so if there are people trying to solve this problem and they want your help solving it and they will pay you to solve it, now you've got all the motivation in the world to build an incredible solution to the problem, and you've proven that it's worth building. So once you've gone out and you've proven all these things, you actually prove you can solve the problem. And then once you prove that you can solve the problem, your last assumption to test is that you can achieve product market fit by solving the problem. And that product market fit is this nice, it's that synergy when the founder's goals align with the market's goals, your customer's goals, so that you can both achieve what you want. So these are the 5 assumptions that you're going to test, and you're going to test them in order, and they correspond to the 5 different phases of finding product market fit. That first phase is called finding early adopters. That group of people who are already trying to solve the problem, we call them early adopters. And so your job is to go find them. And so what you're going to help your teams do and your students do is understand the tests they need to run to do that. And the tests we use to find early adopters are customer interviews. One-on-one conversations to discover what problems customers are trying to solve, how they describe them, and where they look for the solutions. Once you understand those 3 things, you can put together what's called an offer test. So by understanding what problems they're trying to solve, the words they use to describe it, and the places they look for the solution, you can put together an offer of a solution and use that to go run your marketing tests. So use the marketing channels and the marketing copy you hear during the interviews to do cold outreach testing, like cold emails, cold calls, and to do ad campaigns, where you offer a solution to the problem and you measure how many people interact with that offer. Once you've got enough people interacting with the offer, then teams move on to currency testing. So in this phase, we're actually taking money or taking the currency that we need to achieve victory from our customers. So it takes the form of pre-sales in case of B2C or letter of intents in case of B2B. So you have any questions about that stuff? You guys are doing a great job throwing questions in there. Just below me is a question section, and Doan is in charge. He's going and he's moderating the questions. So go ahead and put anything you want in there, and then we'll answer your questions at the end. All right, so once we've proven that we've got currency, and we've proven it's worth building an actual business here, then we go on to utility testing. Utility testing is where we prove that we can actually provide value, and we do that not with a product. So a lot of people talk about MVP as being like some sort of beta or a simple product. Our MVP here is going to be a manual solution. The reason why you want your teams and your students creating manual solutions is that while they're very expensive to run, they're extremely inexpensive to iterate. And during this utility testing phase, we're doing a lot of experimenting to figure out, do we have the right solution for our customers? Is it actually solving the problem? And if we're building software all the time to test this, it's going to be very expensive for us to iterate and make changes. So instead, we create a manual solution. So it's Concierge MVP, Wizard of Oz MVP, and we're actually going to measure if we're actually solving the problem. All right, finally, once we've proven we can solve the problem with a manual solution, then we move on to the final phase of product market fit, which is scaling to fit, where we start scaling. And scaling looks very simple. We start actually building a product. We start automating the solution. We move on to bigger and larger channels, marketing channels, and bigger and larger customer segments. So those are the 5 phases of product market fit and the 5 tests you need to run to find it. And what's really nice is that they go in order. They build on one another. Right? You already know that we don't want to start off building a product. You're already teaching that. But of course, we don't want to start off building a automated product until we know what a manual solution looks like, until we've had a chance to iterate on that solution. But we don't want to build that solution until we've proven people will pay us to actually create it. And we can't prove that people will pay us unless we actually get people to come to us. And we do that through landing pages and offer testing and marketing tests. And we can't actually create marketing tests until we've spoken to our customers and actually figured out what problems they're trying to solve and where they're looking for solutions. So in this way, by going through each of these tests and each of these phases, each phase builds on top of each other for the most efficient path to product market fit. So if you've probably already noticed, these phases spell out the word focus, and that corresponds to the focus framework, which is what Don alluded to, and it's the workbook series that I've created that basically breaks these 5 phases down into individual concrete steps. So feel free to use any process you want. Feel free to even use the focus concepts if you want. If you want some help actually teaching each of these phases, we've got that for you if you want it. So what you do is it takes the focus, or it takes the entire product market fit journey and breaks it into individual concrete steps. And we'll actually get to do one of them today. So tiny little pieces. And then it orders those tiny little pieces. So these are exercises you can actually give to students or give to startups, and they will help them walk step by step from beginning to end of finding product market fit. And then these exercises, like I said, which we'll do, they come in all sorts of forms. So we've got worksheets that they'll fill out. We've got some experiment design templates that they'll use to actually create their designs and put together their success metrics. We've got some spreadsheets that will help them track their progress over time. And then finally, some tools to actually create the experiments. And these are all tools and experiments and worksheets, et cetera, that we use at actual accelerators. So I'm really excited that folks like you and Diana and Doan get to use them in the classroom as well. Okay, so that just talks about how we create rigor, so how we create this process, that actually structured process to create rigor that we can actually challenge students with and make sure that we're actually teaching them something valuable. Now let's talk about how this end-to-end process can actually create an experiential environment. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn to this website and this platform that you're using right now to watch this, and we're actually going to do an experiential activity. Before we dive into that, though, I want to make sure that you guys are all sort of familiar with this whole worksheet and this whole experience. I should have introduced it at the beginning. My apologies for not doing so. So you already know below me is the question and answer section. But to my right, or to the right of the video, there's a slide section there where you can you've got your own copy of slides. So you can take this copy, you can download it, you can copy and paste it, you can move forward or back, you can do anything you want with those slides. The arrows down on the bottom will help you out. And then we've got the notes section as well. So you can take your own notes there, the 5 phases of product market fit. I should have introduced those before. Feel free to take your notes if you want. But what I want to introduce now is this idea generation exercise. So here, I just opened up this new tab, and you should have a worksheet. And this is the idea generation, which is the second exercise inside of Focus. And we're going to play around with this together. So what I want you to do, I'm just going to change my view here so you guys can see me and the worksheet together. Okay. So what I want you to imagine is that if we were in person, or if you were going to use a worksheet like this or any of these, you would hand them out. You'd actually give students actual worksheets. What I've done here is I've replicated that. I've created a digital version of the worksheet for you. And what you're going to do is fill it out with me, along together. Okay. So step 1 in our idea generation process. Now, this is an exercise you can use to help students come up with an idea for a business, an idea for a company. So step 1 is to actually click on the word idea. Hopefully you should see that. And I want you to cross it out. I want you to put in a bunch of X's. So hopefully you can see that on my screen. I'm putting in a bunch of X's on the word idea, and I'm going to replace it with the word problem. And the reason why we're doing this is because that very first principle, customers don't buy products, they buy solutions to problems. So there's no point in coming up with a bunch of product ideas. That's not going to lead us anywhere. We need to come up with problems, potential problems that we can solve for customers. Right? And so this is an exercise where you can introduce the concept that customers don't buy products, they buy solutions to problems, and then you can immediately follow it up with this kind of exercise and say, oh, by the way, we're going to start your process of finding the right idea by pointing you to the right problem to solve. And we do that by looking at who has problems. Right? We look at actual customer segments, and that's what you're going to do. Is you're going to help your customers, help your students identify the customers that they are most interested in solving problems for. So down here in step number 2, you're going to have your students write out what segments they are currently members of. Because segments that they are currently a member of, they will know the problems extremely well, and they will know how to find people who are experiencing these problems. So I want you to fill this out with us. I'm going to do it over here. I'll put in some examples, but you write in the segments that you are currently a member of. So I'm a startup founder. Oops. Startup teacher. I'm a Seahawks fan. I'm a fusion dancer. And I'm recently engaged. Okay, so yeah, you can add more if you want. But yeah, make sure you can come up with at least 5 of these before moving on. All right. So once you've done that, then your students are going to move on to actually write down the segments that they used to be members of. Again, segments that they used to be members of, they're going to have an unfair advantage because they're going to be able to understand their problems well and be able to reach them really well. So segments that they used to be members of. Swing dancer. Failed founder. And while you're doing this, like I always come up with member segments that I'm currently a member of. So feel free to encourage students to do that as well. All right. So you'll notice that it can be kind of hard to come up with these things. Like it can be a little tricky, and that's the point. Like this is a brainstorming process. You want to create this environment where people are, they get the easy stuff out of the way, and then they're actually started pushing and like, oh, what other things do I know? What other groups of people am I familiar with? All right. Step 4. Now you're going to write down what segments you're passionate about. Maybe you've never been a member of this segment, but you're just passionate about solving problems for this segment. So for me, it's like underserved students. Who else? We've got emerging startup ecosystems, foster children, professors. Meditators. Now, during this phase, you can have segments that actually overlap, and that's just fine. Right? Again, this is a brainstorming process in order to get everyone's juices flowing and come up with a bunch of different ideas. So I'm just going to check. Donna and Diana, are we getting any? Is everything working okay? Okay, I'm getting thumbs up from Doan. Perfect. Okay, great. Okay, so now we're going to move on to step 5. Now, step 5 is actually a callback to the first exercise in focus. The first exercise in focus, we actually define what success is for the entrepreneur in a measurable way. This helps them understand like what they're actually trying to get out of starting a company so that they can make sure all of their experiments align to that thing. Because it turns out if they haven't actually figured out what the measurable thing is they want to achieve, they end up traversing and going a bunch of different directions, and it can make it for a very noisy journey. So I'm just gonna fly over this, but just know that people can have all sorts of things here. So like $1 million in the bank. Oops, $1 million. In the bank. They can have like an IPO, they can have an acquisition, they can have 1,000 people impacted, but it's going to be very sort of general and something measurable so they know where they're headed. All right, and now what happens is they get to pick 3 segments that they've called to up here, segments that they know really well or are just passionate about serving, that they think can help get them this victory. And they simply write down, well, who's the potential segment that they want to serve that might help them achieve their victory. So for me, I might say, you know what, I want to serve startup founders. And then you write in what hypothesized problem. What problem do you think? Oops, I don't think you guys can see that. Okay. What problem do you think this segment might have that you can help solve? It doesn't have to be a real problem. It's just a starting point. So in my case, I might say, overwhelmed trying to find product market fit. All right? So go ahead and pick one of your segments and do the same thing. Write one segment down and just guess at what problem they might have. Yours could be your students. Yeah, I'm passionate about helping my students. What's the problem I think my students have? Not the problem I see my students have. Okay, so I'm going to do another one here. All right, so my other example, startup teachers trying to help them solve the problem. They're not sure how to make teaching rigorous and accessible, which is why we're doing this session together. Okay, so by doing this, walking students through this process, something magical happens because, one, we've moved their attention away from the product and towards where it really matters, the problem. Number two, we've got them thinking about people more than products as well. We've got them thinking about the actual customers that they're going to serve. And then three, they're going to actually do this with three different segments, and so they'll have built-in backup plans. So when they go out and try and interview these customers, if they find that the problem their customer is actually trying to solve is not going to help them achieve their victory, they know immediately where to go to next. So they don't have to worry, they don't have to emotionally attach to this one thing because they don't have a backup plan. They'll say, oh, you know what, that first segment didn't work out, that's fine. Let me go move on to the second segment. So you can help them iterate extremely quickly through their experiments. All right, my friends. So that is the idea generation exercise. Like I said, that's the second exercise in focus. Feel free to use the concepts from here for any of your teaching that you want at all. All right. So with that, I'm going to talk just about the last component of our session today before we move on to Diana, and that is how we make this entire experience accessible. Like, how do we actually measure whether or not students are learning the concepts? How do we measure if we need to teach some other concepts better? How do we provide individualized instruction? And of course, how do we do grades? So by having an end-to-end process, you can create this really interesting relationship with accessibility. And what you can measure are four different things. You can measure, do the students have a basic understanding of the nuts and bolts of the process? One step above that, you can measure, can they generalize the process? You can give them specific examples, but can they generalize and understand how it works conceptually? Finally, you can measure, can they actually apply the process in the real world? And then finally, can they produce results when applying that process? So those are the four things that you can actually measure when you're teaching a process. And the ways you can assess them are pretty straightforward. So the way that you assess whether or not someone understands the process is to simply test. Right? This is your classic, the test that we've all taken and we all run in university experiences. So what are the three requirements of a success metric? Nuts and bolts of running an experiment. List two types of B2B pricing experiments. Compare Wizard of Oz MVP with a concierge MVP. Like I said, tactical nuts and bolts, just straight up testing. Do you understand the underlying concepts of the process? One step above that, you can start testing, can they generalize the idea? So you can provide them with case studies and say something like, hey, Celeste wants to start an autonomous lawnmower business. What assumption should she validate first, and how should she validate it? So now here you're providing an opportunity for them to actually conceptualize and say, okay, what would I do if I was in that situation? Identify the riskiest assumption, and then develop an experiment to actually test that assumption. Another example, Tyree's website is getting a lot of traffic but isn't generating many leads. What should he do to figure out why? So now we're especially like an MVP type, or excuse me, MBA type setting. You can really provide these case studies examples and then see, do they really understand, the validation process from end to end. And I'll tell you, these are the questions I get all the time. So if they can answer these questions, they can do my job, which would be just fantastic to have more people teaching this stuff. All right. To test whether or not they can apply the principles, you've got all of these experiments. Well, at least, in focus, we've broken them down, but you can create your own step-by-step exercises for your process. So Focus has 40 of these things, over 40 of these things, and each one of these is an actual exercise that they can fill out, and you can actually assess, do they understand the underlying principles? You can look at the paper and say, oh, I can see that you understand or don't understand. In addition, you can measure not necessarily how far they get in the process, but how many different experiments they run. Because sometimes you'll get a failed experiment and you have to go backwards. We don't want to be penalizing students for recognizing a bad idea and not building it. We want to actually incentivize that. So measuring, how many experiments they actually run, even if it's the same experiment over and over again, that's fantastic. Some of these experiments and exercises even have dates built in, so you can measure, are they hitting their dates? Are they being aggressive enough? And actually, doing what they say they're going to do, so you can hold them accountable in that way. Like I said, you can use Focus in your classroom if you want, but these are just some ideas that you can use in your own class. Take this process, break it down into individual, bite-sized pieces, and then create experiments and experiences around each of those pieces. These exercises also lend themselves really well to individualized instruction, because like I said, when you get the exercises back from students and you can see, oh my gosh, clearly I'm not hitting this concept hard enough because they're not conceptualizing it properly. And so now you can go back and you can provide either individualized instruction to teams that don't get that, or talk about it in the entire class. And because students will be at different phases of the process throughout the course, you can make sure you can actually flip the classroom, have them do the exercises, read the material out of the classroom, and then when they come in, you use that time to actually go over the exercises with them and see where they need some more help. All right, so let's talk about measuring how if they produce results. Now, for what it's worth, this is just me, but this feels more like an extra credit, like if you're actually able to produce results, because again, I don't want to encourage, especially in a student setting, people to push results that aren't true. We want them their goal should be to understand the process and to see reality as it is. So what you actually want to do is, one way you can measure that is with the spreadsheets that are part of Focus. So these spreadsheets will actually measure their progress towards achieving product market fit. And it's like the coolest, most fun thing. So you can get this data, even if you haven't actually built the product, you can actually track, am I on my path to product market fit? So anyway, that's available to you. And we can talk about that if you have questions, and we'll try and answer that on how you create that on your own. Okay, so those are the 4 different things that you can assess and how you can assess them. And that's basically the core principles that we wanted to talk about today. That to go and create your rigorous classroom, you need to be teaching an end-to-end process, and in doing so, you'll create this rigorous, experiential, and accessible model. And in turn, you'll take this difficult concept of teaching entrepreneurship, which lacks a process. You'll turn the business model canvas from something that's starts a process into an actual process. And if you want, the Focus framework is available to you guys, and we'll talk about how to get it, and you'll actually get to play with it when we're all done. It provides these concrete steps for product market fit, orders them, and provides exercises and tools to do that along the way. Okay, so we can switch from making entrepreneurship just hard to making teaching entrepreneurship being actually impactful, and that's all of our goal. Okay, so we will play around with Focus a lot, and I'll show you how to do that. But first, I want to get to some of these great questions that have been coming up, and I've been seeing them fly in. I'm really excited to answer them. Before we do that, though, I want Diana to chime in about how she's actually been using tools like Focus and other processes to create this end-to-end process and this dynamic experiential learning environment. So Diana, can you enlighten us? Tell us a little bit about how you've been creating your experiential environment. Oh, hold on a second, Diana. You are muted. So
You're right. You're
yes.
right about that.
Yes, we're there. Okay, fire away.
So I teach a more traditional business plan writing course, and I find that most of the time whenever you teach a class like that, you get close to the end of the semester and you find out that there are huge gaping holes inside of the business plan, and because it takes them so long to actually produce that product, and it's hard to judge whether it's going to the right direction until you get there. If you're a very forward-thinking educator, then you start having them submit ideas earlier on in the process. And I would say, like, the main tool that we've had so far is to say, I don't think that what you have is a really good idea. Why don't you try again? And what the focus framework allowed me to do is to say, try again. And they're like, I don't know what to do. And so I'd say, well, let's fill out this worksheet together, because once you fill out this particular worksheet, it would be impossible for you not to know what to do next or to try next. So to me, they were an invaluable resource to get students brainstorming on what actions they should take. And Justin and I actually did an experiment in the class that I used last semester. So we so I had 5 groups. We required 2 of the groups in the class to use the focus framework throughout the semester, and then we made it optional for every other group. And the 2 groups that were required to use the focus framework performed well. We have a business plan competition at the end of the semester, and they performed better than any of the other groups. It could be mere luck, but I think that watching them, go through their thought process, and I kind of think about it like showing your work. It's not that we're hoping that they get the right answer. It's the process of showing their work is really valuable to them putting on the effort. And even the groups, I talked to one of the students in the groups that weren't required to use it, and she said, it seemed like there was a lot to do there, but she's saving all the materials for when she decides to start her business, because it seemed like an invaluable resource. So I definitely urge you to check out the product and to see for yourself. Like, there are a lot of issues that you struggle with on a regular basis of how to get people to think about who they're going to contact and what they're going to say to them and who their customers are. And these worksheets really, really help them figure that stuff out. Not only that, but I had them fill out the worksheets in class and then share what they came up with. So not only are we nipping the problem in the bud early on, like if they're starting down the wrong path, we can figure it out very, very early on, but they're learning from one another. And so to me, that was another really powerful aspect of the materials. So I'm a big fan. That's why I think both Joan and I are here, and happy to answer any questions about how it worked in the classroom, if any of you have those.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Diana, for sharing your question, or sharing your perspective. Now we get to the super fun part where we basically get to just spend the rest of the time talking about what you guys want to talk about. So answering any questions you have about creating an experiential learning environment. So I'm just going to switch my view here, and then I'm going to make sure that here we go. Okay. So Don and Diana, you guys will be able to see this. So here's what we're going to do. We're just going to play around, and I'm going to, you know what I'm going to do? So I'm going to come over here. Nope, I'm not going to cover up Don and Diana. Here we go. Okay, now I got it. Okay. Oops. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Okay, so let's talk about, first question, okay, so that's Don's question. Well, that doesn't count as a real question, so we're going to hide that one. Okay, so Don, you might be muted as well, so we can get both of you guys off muted. Okay, but Chris has a real question. So Chris isn't a plant, so how to copy these exercises. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to open up, let's do this here. I'm going to go to bonuses section, and I'm going to activate this. Okay, so what I'm going to do for everyone who's teaching at a university setting, let me do this one here. That's what I want. I want to make sure you guys have a chance to actually play with focus and see if it makes sense in your classroom. So what you're going to do is you're going to just type in your university or college-based email address and click request eval, and I'm going to give you guys 60 days to actually use focus over the summer as you're designing your courses for for the fall. So you'll have access to all 5 workbooks, all 40 exercises, the spreadsheets, all the tools. You'll get to play around with all of them and decide if it makes sense for your class. If it does, let me go back here. If it does, there's a couple ways you can use it in your class. So you guys are going to get The 2 months to go play around with that. If you want to just teach the exercises, if you just take the exercises, you can give them out to your students and you just teach them yourself. Just buy one copy. You only need one copy of Focus to teach as many people as you want. That's $99 for the electronic version, or $199 for the box set here. If you end up wanting to have your students actually do it, so they have access to all of the write-ups. So each of these, so they get these electronic workbooks that tells them how to actually fill out the worksheets and everything. If you want your students to get the electronic version of those, or any version of those, if you have 10 plus students, you'll get your electronic copy for free, and then each student will get $20 off their copy. If you've got a class of 20 or more students, then you'll get the box set, the printed version for free, as well as the electronic one, and then each of your students will get $40 off. So that's how you get and play with this stuff. So thanks for the question, Chris. If you guys have any other questions about that stuff, just let us know. Okay, so let's go back to questions, and then we're going to hide this one. Oh, where'd my little... Okay, Dylan, I might ask for your help in this. Oh, I found it. Hide. Okay. Next up. Actually, Dylan, if you might be familiar with these, so if you want to just call them out, I'll do the first one, but if you want to do the rest, then, because I'll be reading these for the first time. So I'll do the first one. So how do you handle assessment of those who validate that their idea isn't going to work over, or have to go back and start the process over again? So I touched on this a little bit. Don or Diana, do you guys want to share your perspective on, how do you assess someone who has to go back to the starting point because they've invalidated an assumption? Diana, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Diana.
The way that I do it is just to make sure that they do the work. That's just like any entrepreneur. You can't guarantee a specific result, but what you can measure is whether they're putting in the effort. How many interviews are they doing? Are they filling out the worksheets? And usually, what we're left with is like the best metric that we used to have was how many interviews did they do over a week's period. Well, now with the worksheets, you have an additional way to assess them, and you don't need to have them be doing interviews every week, but they can show their work. That's like the key thing for me of what it is that they're doing every single week, so you can measure their effort.
Nice. Awesome. Don, 30 seconds, anything you want to add to that? I think you're muted, brother. Don, I think you're muted, so I'm just going to move on to the next question. Okay. So, all right, so next question here is, let's move this one hide down. Okay. Answer. How do I get into this if I've never worked at a startup or ran a startup myself? So just to be clear, like this session we're running today is geared for entrepreneurship professors and at universities and community colleges. So if by get into this you mean like, well, how do I teach us? How do I sort of get credibility? We'll talk about that. But just so you know, like everything we're talking about today is geared towards that, as opposed to someone who wants to get into education. So, yeah, Don, are you around? Yeah, you are. Yeah, cool. Do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I think it certainly is a nice prerequisite if you have been involved in that on some level. But I think part of what is fantastic about the work that both of you guys do is it really is almost common sense. So, I've worked with this stuff with people who have zero startup experience in any way, shape, or form, and they get it and they're able to use it in class and be knowledgeable about it and be comfortable guiding people with this stuff. So it's just picking it up and using it. I mean, the stuff really can be that easy.
Awesome. Yeah, fantastic. Well, and I'll just add to that I have a successful startup and no one ever asks me about it. It's sort of one of those things where you assume you have to have one in order for people to listen to you, but you just don't. It's one of those falsifiable hypotheses that turns out to be false. If you're, like to Don's point, if you're providing common sense advice that makes sense, people enjoy having that. Okay, so
can I just add
please,
just into that?
Go for it.
If you haven't been an entrepreneur yourself, that's why you need the focus framework, because when they're interviewing people and you know that they're getting the wrong answers, but you don't know what it is, like there's a worksheet on how they can ask the absolute right questions. So it's not up to you to help them figure out the right answers to ask. There's like a form that they can fill out that will generate for them the script for all the interview questions they'll have to ask. So if you've never started a business before, these tools are even more valuable for your teaching experience.
Nice. That's fantastic. Thank you, Diana. Okay. Oh, so yeah, we're going to go in priority order in terms of the questions. So if you have a question down below that you want us to answer, just click the vote button on it, and it'll pop up the votes, and then we'll answer them in that order. Okay. So what about solutions that are first to market, e.g., Snapchat? How was Snapchat validated? Okay, so this one's super interesting because as a teacher, you're going to get all sorts of examples like this. Like you're going to, the iPhone, or you're going to get, all sorts of crazy Facebook, whatever, big giant thing that was not apparently validated. And so the response that I use to this, which you'll feel free to steal, is twofold. Number one, this is a way to start a company. This is the most effective way that I know to start a company. That does not mean that it's the only way to start a company. There are lots of ways to start a company that involve 1,000 people go start 1,000 companies and we hope one of them hits. That's the Snapchat way, right? That's the classic way that companies are built. So we can build a lot of amazing companies that way. But if you want to increase the odds of an individual single founder being successful, this is the most effective way to start validation first. Now, the second part of this question is the entire idea that at the core of every successful company, no matter what it is a solution to a problem. So Snapchat identified a real problem that people were having and solved it, even if it didn't know it was doing it. Right? So that core principle is the same no matter what happens for any successful company. The question is, are you intentional about trying to find that problem first, and then building a company around it, as opposed to just like praying that that a product you happen to build just happens to be solving a problem for someone. All right. Anything other sage advice you guys want to add on that before we dive into the next question? I'm getting no's. Okay.
No.
Great. So let's hide that one. Okay. All right, Howard. Oh, this one's a long one, Did we answer this one already?
Yeah. So basically the idea was, how do you get them past the sort of customer interview point and all that? And, it gets back to the accessibility part that at the end of the day, these kids are trained in the ways that they've been trained. And so if you want to get them from, point A to point B, then you have to build in some accessibility of point B and then point C and then point D. So, but again, it's part of that whole process view to say, where do you want to get them to, and then back up into it so that you have points that are accessible that will drag them along for those that are trained in that way.
Yeah. Awesome.
But this kind of the kind of process you have here in the series of worksheets and all that kind of stuff, it makes it a lot easier to build that whole process out.
Nice. Okay. Fantastic. So I'm going to go through some of these other questions. Don, can you look through the backlog? Looks like we've got some other questions in here and just highlight any that should be. Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right, next up. Okay, so the exercises, use it with our students. So we talked about that. If you have any other questions about that, so you basically just take the worksheets. It's basically you buy one copy of Focus for each teacher. And then the students can use the worksheets. If you want the students to actually use the workbooks themselves, then they just buy their own copies. Okay, and then you can just email me if you have any questions about that and work out the deal and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so Andrew asks, Don and Diana, what are the biggest issues your students encounter / gripe using a framework like this? So I'm excited to hear this. So Diana, why don't you lead us off? What are the biggest issues you hear from students about using a framework like this?
There are a lot of worksheets. There's 40 of them, and you typically have 13 weeks to teach a class. So if you're doing the math, that's a lot of worksheets they have to fill out per week. So I think that the way that I handled this for the teams that were testing and had to use every worksheet, they just said it was a lot to go through. So I think you can either pick and choose the ones that are applicable to the students to have them fill it out, or you can have them I came up with, these are the ones you're required to do, and I think these additional ones would be helpful to your business, but not necessarily necessary. So I think there are some like pivotal worksheets that every human being should do whenever they have an idea. And then other ones were like incredibly valuable if you want to go the extra effort, but maybe not necessary to moving through the product. So that was the number one complaint that I received about them.
Gotcha. Any other secondary stuff that folks should know about? Like secondary problems? Yeah, go ahead, Diana.
Joan, do you want to go ahead?
Sorry, no, I was just going to say, I mean, I find the same thing. I haven't used this particular one with an entire class of students, but it's the same thing. They feel overwhelmed, and again, it's part of mapping it out for them and just leading them through it.
Gotcha. Cool. Diana, anything else you want to add that people should just be aware of?
Yeah, the secondary problem that we had with the worksheets is my particular class, we were working on like tech transfer ideas, university ideas that we were going to then spin off in a company. So they weren't necessarily their ideas that they started off with. So they didn't feel like all the worksheets applied to their initial idea. And like I said, you pick out the ones that are the most applicable and you have them go through those. Just because there are some difficulties that some people might have in one way or another doesn't take away from the fact that this is incredible content. And like some of these worksheets to me are like gold. Like I can't even imagine having an entrepreneur starting a business without doing some of them. So, there will be different golden nuggets for different professors. So I encourage you to check them out for yourself.
That's awesome. I think that's sage advice all around. Yeah, just know that, like to Diana's point about them having a bunch of worksheets, this is literally an exhaustive step-by-step process, taking anyone who knows nothing about starting a company, not just like teaching them theory, but like here's how they do it. So, and it's designed, like I said, for use at Accelerator. So this is like hardcore stuff. To teach it all in a semester, like I don't even think it's possible. Like I would take the first workbook, maybe the second workbook, if we're getting real about starting a company, and then add on secondary workbooks. So thank you so much for sharing that. It's a great question as well. Thank you for that, Andrew. Okay. Cool. Don, did you have something?
Yep, no.
Okay,
no.
good.
So I was just going to say, they were asking about if there's an instructor's manual. And
I'm super excited about this question. I really want to make an instructor's manual. So I've started making one. I'm working with an accelerator who's going to teach us as part of their application process. And so I'm really excited to, because I know when I see these worksheets and come in, I know immediately like what's wrong, what needs to get fixed. But you might not know, and so I want to actually create this this worksheet, this set of like so basically checkpoints. Like when you get an exercise, if it doesn't say this, then there's something wrong, and here's what you tell the students to go fix it. And like I said, I'm excited to do this for you, but also for accelerators, because like. We can make this scalable. We can make this entire process of solving people's problems scalable, and that gets me super excited. So, so what I did is I set up. I have my own success metric. I can't tell you what it is because that would break the experiment. But just know that if a certain number of people end up using Focus in their course, there will be a manual created. So. So know that I really want to build one. There isn't one now, but if you happen that we don't meet the success metric and you end up getting Focus and using your class, send me an email and I will work with you individually to figure out how to do this. Thank you for that question. That was great.
Next one's basically, supplementary kind of thing. So are there other sort of tools or lessons that you can partner up with this that you found valuable?
Okay, so I'll have you guys talk about this. So have you guys found any other, like Don, I know you use tools from a number of different places, including Diana's stuff.
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, I don't know as if I use them in partnership with each other, but it's again part of a process. So I start my kids with Diana's book, and then get them into a simulation called Venture Blocks. Then I get them into some of Justin's stuff, and I use the Lean Canvas with Ash's Lean Canvas, and then I get them into some of Alex Bruton's stuff with the Enographer and idea modeling. So I mean, all these things sort of, they can be packaged together in lots of different ways. Part of it depends on what's the point of your course. Is it just sort of an ideation kind of a thing? Is it a to Z start a business thing? Is it a feasibility? So it sort of depends, but that's what I do.
Awesome.
I love all those resources. The only one I would add is I use Shark Tank videos,
Yeah.
which is like it's the student's favorite part of the class. So I find a 2.5 minute snippet that specifically pertains to one of the worksheets or the areas that we're covering that week, and it makes them a lot more engaged and into the material for the week.
Awesome. Okay, so I'll share one other tidbit about that, and then, but before I do that, we are at time, so we're gonna wrap up here probably nowish, unless Don, if there's one more question that's like super interesting, we can do that. But while you look at that, I'm gonna everyone know the feedback on the workshop and the platform is super, super important for me. This is my first time teaching this workshop, so I've opened up a feedback tab for you. If you could leave your feedback on what you liked, so we don't change it, and what you didn't like, so we do change it, that would be extremely helpful. And this platform that you're using is something I built from scratch. So if you have any feedback on it, I would also love to know so that I can make improvements on it going forward. So with that, any other super important questions, Don?
Well, not to say any of them are not important, but no, I mean, there's a lot of them going on, and a lot of them have to do or focus a little bit on other resources, other texts, supplemental things, all that kind of thing, which I think, we threw some stuff out there, but I think we kind of hit it for most part.
Gotcha. Okay, great. So what we'll do is, I'm just going to answer James's question real quick. Does your framework provide resources and suggestions to test MVP? Yes, it does. And all the variations of MVP. So there's a dozen different types of MVP, and it talks about all of them. Help students get stuck on topics. That one, just FYI, I totally forgot to mention this. In the electronic version of Focus, you have access to a question and answer section where I literally answer everyone's questions. So if you need help answering your students' questions, have them post in the electronic version of Focus, and I will go on there and I will help answer the questions. And so we can sort of tag team on that. Okay, and then running them as teams or individuals, yes. The answer is both. Ultimately, like you're going to need a team to start a successful company, but it works both ways. Okay, so with that in mind, friends and family, let me get back to this here. Oh, and let me get on our last slide. Where did we go? Skype. There we go. All right. So I want a big thank you for Don and Diana for helping making this possible. Thank you to everyone for all your interaction and your great questions. I'm super excited to be working with you guys. And if there's anything I can do to help, please feel free to reach out and email me. You'll get my email. I've been sending you all these emails about these announcements. Enroll in the 60-day eval, and then we'll get you a copy of Focus so you can actually play with it. Thank you again, and have a great day. A great summer.
Thank you.
Bye.